Hello, my name is Rich Howard, owner of Architectural Builder Supply, and this video is to bring you a closer look at the hinge tweaker, the HTRED hinge tweaking tool. This, for all intents and purposes, is a big piece of steel, and it has a very specific purpose. It does one thing and it does it very well, and is used actually quite commonly in the door, steel frame industry. And if you're someone who makes a living installing the material, you might be a contractor who services condominium buildings, and you focus on that sort of client base. Quite frankly, this type of tool is indispensable to you, in my opinion, and here's what it is. Hinge tweaker tool is something that allows you to manipulate the margin between the door and the jamb. There are reasons why you might want to do that. You might have an ill-fitting sort of door to begin with in a new installation because perhaps the door is not exactly square and plumb. You might have a fatigued condition on the door or the frame or the hinge for that matter, where you need to try to close up that gap and that margin between the door and the frame, because what you're finding is now over time the door is no longer hanging plumb in the frame, and you're making contact with the door on the frame, generally at the top of the opening. So the hinge tweaker allows you to basically, in rude, circumstances, just simply bend the steel so that you can suck the door back up and try to re-obtain a proper margin. Now, what does it do? Here is a common hinge, and when the hinge is laid out flat, you can see that there is what is called a swag on the hinge leaves. If they were completely flat to the bottom of the hinge, there'd be no swag. S-W-A-G is how I know it. A full mortise hinge has swag on the hinge leaves, meaning that when the leaves are brought parallel, there's a gap between the door and between the hinge, and that's to maintain that typical 1/8 of an inch margin. Well, what if you were to take a tool and literally bend the leaf to the point where you closed that margin off, where it was no longer existent and was somewhat smashed together, is really what it is. You could take and pick up all of that distance from there to there. So you can achieve a near zero margin on the hinge side to try to get back the lost margin on the strike side, generally at the top only. And how you do that is you just take the business end of this, you slide it over, and then you just start to literally bend, and bend. You're going to want to be very careful doing this. I've done this more times than I can possibly recall, but the point of the matter is you have a hinge plate in the frame for sure, and you have one that's in the door. Now, depending on the door construction, they could just be simple plates that are spot welded down to the door and frame, or they could be quite continuous and heavier than standard steel. But you want to be cautious, because if you were to break a weld, which is uncommon that it would actually happen, but it can. So you want to be gingerly when you're using this tool to not overstress anything, especially those spot welds. And on an older sort of installation, you can certainly run the risk of popping a spot weld. So that's how the tool is used. The red is for hinges that are 134 thousandths of an inch thick. That's standard weight. It means standard weight. That just slides right over like that, and now you're in business. And you can really take, and with that lever, be able to apply a lot of stress, that you can manipulate that margin by literally modifying the swag on the hinge leaves. This is the red. The red is for standard weight. Hinge tweaker has their blue version, which is for heavyweight, 180 thousandths of an inch thick hinges, and that means 4.5 inch really. I have never used this on a 5-inch hinge, and I don't believe it's going to work if it's a heavyweight 5-inch. But the HT, it ought to be blue. Let's see if that's the right part number. It is. That is specifically intended for heavyweight, but it's also specified for 4.5 inch. So if you have 5-inch hinges, the barrel diameter will likely be too great to fit inside of the tool. There's a green version which will give you heavyweight on one side and standard weight on the other. So there you go. You're going to find doors that are fatigued or leaning over will be opened up at the top. Why the top? Well, the top hinge is really the hinge that's doing the majority of the work. The majority of the door is down below the top hinge, and therefore the majority of the weight is down below the top hinge. And that's where you're going to see doors tip out of their opening, and the largest margin is always at the top. The largest amount of wear and tear is always at the top. Now, before you swag a hinge or re-swag a hinge, check to make sure that the hinge is actually tightened all the way down. Do that first. Check to make sure that the hinge is not so worn that you literally just need to replace the hinge. So do those things before you try to physically change steel on a door and a frame, and a hinge for that matter. You don't want to run the risk of breaking anything that is a much larger problem. Most frequent adjustments will be completed again on the top hinge. Again, that's where the majority of the weight is happening. Occasionally you'll do that at the bottom as well. There is a link below this video to a document called Instructions, where you will be able to review the steps or the outline, what's available, why it's used, and how to go about using it. That's there. There's also a link below this video to a document called Brochure, which will allow you to review the manufacturer's sell sheet on the hinge tweaker tool. Okay, leverage is really the bottom line, and that's really what it says there. A nice 4-page sort of document. We sell these often, however, it's the kind of tool that's capital. You're only gonna buy one of these. It's a very incredibly heavy tool that will take lots of years of use and abuse. Okay, and quite frankly, can be a lifesaver. It's just the bottom line. You might have a door that's you might have a door that's the wrong size, the wrong bevel, hung upside down, and you just need to make the problem go away. And sometimes, quite frankly, quite honestly, the hinge tweaker tool can allow you to do that. People who should be buying this are going to be engineers on universities. Again, people who make a living installing the material, contractors who remotely get into door and framework, and especially for those people who don't encounter it often enough, should probably have a tool like this as well. If you have any questions on the Hinge Tweaker HTRED hinge tweaking re-swagging tool for 4.5-inch standard weight hinges, or any other hinge tweaker product, please feel free to reach out to us. Thank you.